difficult to wrap your head around, right? The scale of what Southern California is dealing with.
Yeah.
These fires, they've been devastating, to say the least.
Absolutely.
27 lives lost. Tens of thousands displaced.
It's heartbreaking.
I mean, the LA fire chief called it one of the worst disasters in the city's history. And the stories we're hearing, well, they just paint this incredibly grim picture.
What really gets me is it's not just the immediate danger, you know?
Yeah.
It's the long-term impact, like the mental health toll, the economic fallout, even the environmental consequences. It's a lot to process.
It really is. And, you know, amidst all this, there's this glimmer of hope, right? The FireAid concert.
Yeah, FireAid.
And this isn't just your average concert. We're talking January 30th, 2 venues. The Intuit Dome, A&D, the Kia Forum, both in Inglewood.
Wow.
Talk about ambitious. And the lineup, well, let's just say, they've pulled out all the stops.
Like, who are we talking?
Okay, so picture this. Joni Mitchell, Stevie Nicks, and then you've got Billie Eilish, Lady Gaga.
Wow. That's a pretty incredible mix.
It really is.
It's interesting, though, right? You've got these icons who have always been involved in social causes.
Yeah.
And then you have this younger generation carrying that torch, I guess you could say.
It's kind of like this passing of the baton, almost.
Yeah, exactly.
And the goal here, well, it goes way beyond just putting on a good show, right?
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we're going to look at how FireAid wants to make a lasting impact.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, let's start with the basics, the dual venue approach.
It's pretty unique, for sure.
Super ambitious, too.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to the scale of what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think it's also about reach.
Right. And speaking of reach, the broadcast. I mean, this is going to be everywhere. AMC theaters, Apple Music, Apple TV, Max, iHeartRadio, everywhere.
Wow, they're really pulling out all the stops. It's like they want to make sure anyone who wants to can be a part of it.
Exactly. And I think that plays into their strategy too, right?
You mean with the fundraising?
Yeah. A global audience, I mean, that opens up so many possibilities. Donations from all over the world.
It's smart.
So let's talk about where the money is going. FireAid is focusing on two things: immediate relief for those affected, and then long-term initiatives to prevent these fires from happening again.
That makes sense.
Especially with wildfires becoming, well, more frequent and intense.
Yeah, we've seen that trend, haven't we?
Okay, so they're working with the Annenberg Foundation on this.
Oh, really? Annenberg, that's a good sign. They don't just lend their name to anything.
Exactly. And they're advising on how the money is used, you know, making sure it has the biggest impact.
Good.
And for transparency, they're setting up FireAid as a 501c3 nonprofit.
Okay, so that's still pending IRS approval, but once that's in place, it makes it easier to attract those big corporate donations, right?
Yeah, and it offers tax benefits for donors too, so it's a win-win. All right, so we've got this huge event, 2 venues, a global broadcast, and a really clear focus. But let's be real, the main draw here is the music.
Oh, for sure.
And the lineup, it's pretty impressive. But what's really interesting to me is some of these artists, they have these personal connections to the cause.
Like, who are you thinking of?
Well, for example, did you know Lady Gaga was actually out there delivering pizzas to first responders during the Woolsey fire back in 2018?
No, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and Gwen Stefani, she set up a scholarship fund for students affected by the 2007 wildfires in San Diego County.
Wow. So this isn't just a performance for them, it's more personal.
Exactly.
And, you know, Billie Eilish, she's been pretty vocal about supporting nonprofits in those areas, especially around Altadena.
Yeah. So how can our listeners get involved? Well, tickets go on sale January 22nd at noon Pacific time.
And get this, there's no pre-sale.
Yeah, they're trying to make it as fair as possible.
That's great. Everyone has a chance.
But keep in mind, a ticket gets you into one venue, either Intuit Dome or Kia Forum, not both.
So it's like 2 separate events.
Exactly, happening at the same time. And the lineups might be a little different.
So you got to choose wisely.
Yeah, but either way, you're guaranteed a great show for a good cause. And if you can't make it, you can catch the broadcast.
Which, again, will be pretty much everywhere.
Right. It's great they're making it so accessible. But for those who can't get a ticket, what are some other ways to contribute?
Well, you can donate directly through the FireAid website.
Easy.
And for larger donations, you can reach out via email, donations@fireaidlillet.org, and they can help you set up an ACH or wire transfer.
We've already seen some huge donations. Steve Ballmer, he owns the LA Clippers, pledged $15 million.
Wow.
And then Disney matched it, another $15 million.
That's incredible.
Even the Eagles, they're not even performing, donated $2.5 million.
So it's really a group effort here.
It really is. But I wonder, with FireAid tackling this from so many angles, are there any potential downsides? Could spreading the funds too thin be a problem?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. I mean, it's a challenge for any large-scale relief effort, right?
Hmm.
How to balance making a broad impact with, well, making sure each initiative gets the resources it needs.
So how can FireAid, with all these different projects, make sure they're using the donations effectively?
Well, that's where the Annenberg Foundation comes in, right?
Hmm.
They have a ton of experience, not just in funding, but in, evaluating impact, holding organizations accountable. I'm sure they'll be working closely with FireAid to develop a really solid plan.
So they're not just writing a check, they're going to be hands-on.
Exactly. It's about setting clear goals, making sure things are measurable, and then, of course, tracking progress.
Makes sense. But I'm curious about the long-term stuff, the fire prevention initiatives. What kind of things can they actually do to, well, prevent these disasters from happening again, especially in an area like Southern California?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? And it's not an easy one to answer. But if you look at the Annenberg Foundation's work, they've always been focused on a few key things: research, community education, and then, working with policymakers. Advocacy, I guess you could say.
So it's not just about putting out the fires, it's about addressing the root causes, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's about creating a more resilient ecosystem.
And that's got to be tricky, right, with climate change and everything. It seems like, well, these fires are only going to get worse.
It's definitely a challenge, but the fact that FireAid is even trying to tackle it, that's a really positive step. It's acknowledging that we can't just react, we have to be proactive.
So it's like a shift in mindset from crisis mode to prevention mode.
Exactly. And that means, a big change in how we think about wildfires. It can't just be the responsibility of firefighters. It has to involve everyone: policymakers, scientists, communities, even, artists and musicians.
Yeah, it's easy to feel helpless when you think about the scale of the problem, but seeing this kind of, well, collaborative effort, it does give you hope.
Definitely. It reminds us that even when things seem really tough, we can make a difference, especially when we work together. And sometimes it takes, something like a benefit concert to really spark that action, bring people together.
Yeah, it's interesting how music can do that, right? It's not just entertainment. It can really be a force for change.
Think about Live Aid, right? Or Concert for Bangladesh. They raised millions of dollars, but they also changed the way people thought about those issues.
It's about that shared experience, that feeling of community.
Yeah. And then using that energy to create something tangible, something that can actually make a difference.
So in FireAid's case, it's about using music to provide relief, but also to get people thinking about the future, about building a safer, more resilient Southern California.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about the relief efforts, the prevention initiatives, the Annenberg Foundation, but for our listeners out there, what's the one key takeaway they should remember?
I think it's that, well, providing immediate aid after a disaster is essential, but real progress, long-term progress that comes from addressing the underlying issues, those things that make those disasters possible in the first place.
So it's about, like we were saying, shifting from reaction to prevention. But I know a lot of people are probably thinking, what can I do? I'm not a millionaire. I'm not a politician. How can, well, the average person contribute to this shift?
That's a great question. And it's one I think we need to explore more, because even small actions can make a difference. It's about, well, staying informed, having conversations, supporting organizations doing the work, and, advocating for change in your community.
So we all have a role to play.
Right. And events like FireAid, I think they remind us that we're not alone in this.
It's like FireAid is, I don't know, starting a bigger conversation,
Yeah.
about how we, well, interact with nature, the choices we make, and what kind of future we're building.
And I think that's where the real lasting impact will be. It's not just about the money raised, it's about awareness, changing how people think about these things.
Giving people the tools to make a difference.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into FireAid, is there a question you want to leave our listeners with? Something to think about?
Well, considering how these wildfires are becoming more frequent, more intense, what can we do? What can we come up with to protect communities and the environment in the future?
That's a good one. It makes you think beyond just the immediate problem.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's new technology, early detection systems, or rethinking how we build in these fire-prone areas?
Maybe it's, going back to some of those traditional
Oh,
practices.
you mean like what indigenous communities have been doing for centuries?
Exactly. They understand fire, how it's a natural part of the ecosystem. There's a lot we can learn from them.
So it's not going to be one simple solution. It's going to take a lot of different approaches.
Yeah, it's got to be multifaceted, combining, science and community involvement and a real respect for nature.
And that's what makes this so important right now. We can rebuild, but we can also, build back better, create a future where we can, well, coexist with these challenges.
I like that.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into FireAid. We hope you learned something, felt inspired, and maybe even a little bit empowered to get involved.
Yeah, remember, every little bit helps. Stay curious, stay engaged,